But hey, we're live and welcome to the 6th Round Retro. I'm your host, Eddie Mercado, along with Fraser Coffeen of BloodyElbow.com. Fraser, how are you, sir?
I am good, Eddie. Thank you for having me once again.
I love having you, of course. Your input is always excellent. Now, of course, the date is August 27th, 2000, and the event is Pride 10, Return of the Warriors. Now, this was my pick. We got Fraser's pick and Eddie's pick. This is one of my picks. This is one of my all-time favorite cards. Maybe I'm feeling ill or under the weather or whatever. This is one that I will just throw on. I mean, I still have the DVD from back in the day. I'll just throw it on and just watch it while I'm trying to get over my sickness and stuff. It's just a super awesome card. Full of, incredible fights, and it was super awesome for me. The commentators were cool. You had Steven Quadros, who is, one of the unsung heroes of the MMA commentator world, and Eddie Bravo, the first American to submit a Gracie. He was also on the mic, which is pretty unique. I can't think of Bravo doing too many commentating gigs for MMA. And we had the classic Pride lady, of course, which was always cool. And yeah, so I think Pride 10, the sport was doing a decent job of cleaning up everything and trying to get their rules kind of formatted the way they want. So it wasn't exactly the Wild West. It was pretty. I think the rules were followed somewhat well at this point. I wouldn't say there were too many fouls going on. And this was also the height of the WWE or WWF for you old school fans. This is when they were like, there was really nothing bigger. Like, this is the height of professional wrestling. Of course, Ken Shamrock had just left professional wrestling and going back into the MMA world at this time. So you got Return of the Warriors. You have Wanderlei Silva. He's making his return to Pride from his UFC fight and a fight on the Brazil circuit. Mark Kerr, the Smashing Machine, bouncing back from his first career loss. Kazuyuki Fujita bouncing back from his first career loss. And we get a yellow card here, which was cool. You remember the yellow cards from Pride?
Yellow card was a thing. That was definitely a part of Pride. Here's it's for a foul, but a lot of times for the stalling, for just being lazy. Get a yellow card.
Yeah, and I think you got deducted 10% of your purse every time you got a yellow card.
Yeah, three yellow cards and you're DQ'd, and every yellow card minus you lose 10% of your pay, which is awesome. Yeah,
and I gotta say, I really enjoyed that about Pride. I like that they had something to combat stalling, and it was incentive to where, if you're out here laying praying or wall installing, you're gonna lose 10% of your purse and you're gonna lose the dominant position. I thought that was swell. I think the UFC needs to look into that and maybe implement something similar. Now, of course, there's a little controversy over yellow cards because of it's kind of subjective, and we've seen it work out great, and we've seen it be a little controversial. So it had its ups, it has its downs, but overall, I think it was a great addition to the sport, and I kind of miss it, to be honest.
Yeah, Pride's got, it's funny you mentioned the WWF at the time, because Pride obviously has these strong pro wrestling roots back to their origins in Japan. And it was always really Pride at all times. Pride always maintained a real close tie to the pro wrestling circuit in Japan, which is very different from the pro wrestling world in the US, because it's sort of seen as, it's still, predetermined finishes and everything like that, but it is sort of seen as a bit more legitimate and a bit more sporting and that kind of thing. But they really always took a certain pro wrestling element. And one of that big elements was, in fight promotion, but also in terms of like, hey, these need to be entertaining fights. Like, that's the most important thing, is entertaining fights. And so, so that's what they tried to put together. And I think this card is a great example of it, because there's a ton of fights on here that, like, strictly speaking, maybe aren't like good, or like a bunch of fighters on here who have some really bad records. I'm going to talk about that as we go, but it's a great card because it's entertaining. Because even if somebody maybe isn't putting on like, an incredible like Demetrius Johnson-esque performance, like, they're fun dudes out there having fun fights, and that really comes through here.
Yeah, I just love this card. And
yeah, it's great.
It had a little bit of everything. We saw the beginning of the end for Ken Shamrock here. We saw the pro debut for Ryan Gracie. also known as the Crazy Gracie, or the Black Sheep Gracie, if you will. And, you know, Renzo Gracie trying to bounce back from a loss himself. Sakuraba bouncing back for his first Pride loss. And, of course, the legendary jiu-jitsu moment where Sakuraba actually breaks the arm of Renzo Gracie. One of the most iconic jiu-jitsu moments in all of mixed martial arts. I mean, legendary.
Yeah, that's the main event. Should we dive in? Should we talk some Saku and Renzo?
Let's do it. Let's get ready. Defeats Renzo Gracie by technical submission with a Kimura at 9 minutes and 43 seconds of round 2. Technical submission. That means there was no tap. That means Sakuraba broke the arm of Renzo Gracie. Oh my God. If you are squeamish in the least bit, you might want to just catch the highlights and skip over the finish, because this is gruesome. Yeah,
it is. It's a nasty finish. And I got to say, I love this fight. I think this fight is tremendous. It's not what you kind of expect it to be in some ways from when they say that it's a great fight, because it's these two excellent submission fighters with very little ground game to it. It's mostly stand up. And a lot of times that happens with two submission fighters, and a lot of times it sucks. And this does not suck. This is really good. It's really compelling. It's really interesting, but it's slow paced. It's very strategic. You know, Sakuraba was coming off of, this is his third Gracie of what would ultimately be 4. And he had beaten Hoyler. And then he had that legendary 90-minute defeat of Royce Gracie, where, you know, that was strategic and a war and drag out, and took him again 90 minutes to beat Royce Gracie, which is insane when you stop and think about it, because you hear, like, we hear about things like that, like, oh, these two fought for, you know, 2 hours in Brazil, you know, back in, you know, 1952. This is like his fight with Royce Gracie is like the only example of that in sort of our modern world of MMA. So he's coming off of that, and then he has this Renzo fight, and it's kind of similar to the Royce fight for a while. Like, it's pretty strategic. It's a little slow paced because both guys are trying to be kind of cautious, and they both, you know, they know how dangerous the other one is. They know that, like, you know, well, if I just do this, then he's going to, you know, quickly get under there and he's going to take me down. So I got to be really cautious. And it's just this, like, very technical, precise game until Sakuraba finds the opening, grabs the arm, spins around, and just snaps the elbow. And it's amazing because it's just this moment of pure, like, submission, grappling violence that he just finds the time to do after 19 minutes of, like, sort of looking for that moment. It's great.
Yeah, definitely a lot like the Royce fight in that respect, but also like the Hoyler fight in some respects. I mean, he broke Hoyler's arm also with the Kimura. So it's like you're doing it again. Like, you broke one Gracie's arm, get into this epic war with another Gracie. Royce can't get off the stool. He's so exhausted. They throw in the towel. And then here you are breaking another Gracie's arm. But, like, before then, like, it appeared as if Sakuraba had no interest in grappling whatsoever, because he was able to get Renzo down multiple times, but he wouldn't engage. He would rather opt to stand above Gracie and just kick the legs or go for some unique variations of stomps and kicks. And he really tried some fancy, I'll just say fancy. He tried some fancy kicks to try to get past the guard of Renzo. And I mean, it was like, what? Like, I thought these guys were about to, you know, get it in. And so, like, the first round, Sakuraba, he gets Renzo down, and I'm like, oh, here it comes. They're about to grapple. But then he just disengages, and I'm like, well, what's going on here? Yeah. So we had these two high-level grapplers opting to kickbox, which, you know, we didn't expect that at the time. I mean, whereas, you know, today it's actually the norm. I mean, you see that all the time nowadays when you have two guys whose specialties are the same. The fight will usually take place in the other areas of MMA. So very ahead of its time, and they're kicking back and forth. Like, I wish I had a count for how many kicks were thrown in this fight. And I mean, you would never believe that a Gracie Sakuraba fight would entail that much kicking. But these dudes were just kicking the shit out of each other, and it was so crazy. And Sakuraba was so prime. Like, this is prime Sakuraba. Like, he's moving around. He's athletic here, you know. it's fun to see. He's doing his cartwheels, trying to pass the guard and stuff like that. And I mean, Renzo made one mistake and he gets a body lock takedown, or he goes for the body lock takedown. Sakuraba locks up his favorite move, the Kimura, does this violent spin, drops down with it, and he breaks Renzo's arm before Renzo even knew what was happening.
Yeah.
And credit to Renzo, he didn't tap. You know, we salute you for that, because it was really bad. His arm looked mangled. Like,
it's bad. It's nasty. It's nasty. And, you know, and the thing is, too, if you weren't watching back at this time period, you don't really have a great appreciation for sort of, or understanding of kind of the history of what led up to this. It's easy to overlook how big of a deal it was back then to break Royler Gracie's arm and then beat Royce Gracie, which no one had ever done at that point, ever. To be clear, Royce, the first UFC champ, no one had beaten him except for Khalid Ismail in jiu-jitsu, but in MMA. And
Ishmael!
Yeah, always Ishmael. And then to break Renzo's arm. Like, the Gracies were, you know, they were legends for a reason. And, like, they like ruled over the sport. And, like, every time one of them came into Pride back at this era, it felt like, you know, like the secret boss fight coming in out of nowhere. You're like, oh no, like this guy's coming to fight me. And Sakuraba takes him out 1, 2, 3 in a row. It's really amazing. Quadros says at the end of the show, he says, Sakuraba's the best fighter in this world, and this fight just proved it. And I completely 100% agree. At this time, Sakuraba, the #1 fighter in the world, he's a guy who I think, unfortunately, perhaps because of not really, I mean, he had the one UFC fight too, but then on the one show. But he's a guy who I think is not going to get ultimately the credit he deserves. He was the best fighter in the world at one point. And this point, this is it. He's incredible.
Yeah,
No, you're not going to say he's #1. Come on.
At this point, I mean, just a year later, he's getting slept by Wanderlei.
Yeah, it faded. Who's #1 if not Saku? Right here.
I mean, I wouldn't. I think Mark Coleman's really on fire at this point in time. Mark Kerr's on fire at this point in time. Vocechin's on fire at this point. In fact, Igor actually beat him right before this fight.
Yeah, so. He had fought Royce for 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Give the man a mulligan.
True, but I mean, Igor did hand him his business, you know. I love Igor though. I'm such an Igor fan. But no, for in all actuality, Sakuraba definitely had the claim to the baddest man on the planet. And especially the way he won. Like, definitive. There's no like, did he tap? Did he not tap? Like, no, he broke this dude's arm, and if the referee wasn't there, he could have completely ripped it off of the body of Renzo Gracie. So, you know, and the respect afterwards was amazing. You know, Renzo gets on the mic and he goes, he called Sakuraba the Japanese version of the Gracie family. And I'm like, oh, yes. Like, that's what this is all about. You know what I mean? A heated rivalry, like a family rivalry, a feud, you know? But at the end of the day, it's all love and it's all respect. And man, what a beautiful, like, poetic scene for martial arts, you know? Like, this, I think this is the most iconic submission of all time in mixed martial arts competition. I can't think of one. You know, you got your Verdum Fedor, that was huge, but nowhere close to what this was.
Well, and I think you just hit the nail on the head with what's so amazing about the entire Sakuraba Gracie feud is that it felt like an old school martial arts, like what we kind of thought of mixed martial arts when it first started. Like, it was, you know, it felt like dojo versus dojo, and like one person like coming in and trying to prove the superiority of like him and his training camp. And, you know, it just felt like it was from this sort of old era in a really cool and interesting way that you know, that we just don't really see anymore. Yeah, it's neat. And I think all of the Sakuraba Gracie fights, you know, fall into that category. Yeah. And I should say, actually, I should correct myself and say that when I said before, you know, this is third of 4 Gracies, it's the third of 4 Gracies during this time. He then later in his late career, he had a couple more Gracie fights, but those pay those no mind.
Yeah, exactly. And even the rematch with Royce.
No,
so, you know, Sakuraba, he went on to have a bunch more epic fights in Pride. Yeah, so his record as of today is 26-17, 1-2, and he finished 23 of his 26 wins. Like, what? That's ridiculous. Like, that finishing rate is absolutely absurd. Like,
it's amazing. And he's got some just incredible fights in there. When you were talking before about, like, you know, ooh, I can't wait to see like the ground battle that never quite materializes. If you're somebody who wants to see that with Sakuraba and be like, what's Sakuraba capable of on the ground, go back and watch his fight with Carlos Newton. I think it's Pride 3, I want to say. An all-time great ground battle. Truly amazing.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you know, Sakuraba has been knocked out a bunch. He's been knocked out 10 times. He finished up his pro career, hopefully, with a fight losing skid. So that's a kind of sad ending to his MMA career. I think he might have some grappling tournaments that he's going on, but I hope he just stays out of the MMA game as far as a fighter goes.
Yes,
coaching, maybe, you know, I'm all for stuff like that. Renzo, on the flip side, this came towards the beginning of a 1-6 losing skid. You know, he got knocked out by Hendo in his next fight. It was brutal.
Brutally knocked out. Yeah.
But his final 6 fights were all against legends, going 3-3. So, you know, go watch his last 6 fights because it's all just bangers, all names. It's I guess we can reel them off real quick. Okay, so his last 6 fights: Carlos Newton, 2. BJ Penn, Pat Miletich, Carlos Newton, 3. Is that right?
I think just 2. Isn't 1 and 2? Maybe fought him twice.
Okay, so he fought Carlos Newton at Pride Bushido 1.
Okay.
And then he fought him again at IFL 6.
I know, right. There you go.
But yeah, Frank Shamrock finishing up against Matt Hughes at UFC 112. I actually forgot that Renzo made it to the UFC.
And I think that's a really cool story about him. I think it's so cool that Renzo ultimately did have that like one UFC fight and ended his career with that one UFC fight. I think that's just a neat way for him to kind of roll out his career and
poetic, very poetic.
Yeah, exactly. It's cool.
I'm such a Renzo fan. He's got a mean squad. They're out of New York. All his guys are killers.
Yep.
And also, a little side note, if you have some time, after you watch this show and after you watch Pride 10, go search for the YouTube video of Renzo Gracie rolling with Ryan Gracie. Phenomenal. I mean, they're just going at it so hard, and it ends with there's no tap or anything. It's just Renzo just kind of tapping like a little, not a smack, but just like a little pat on the cheek to Ryan, being like, good job, we're done here. You know, it's pretty sweet. Yeah. Speaking of Ryan Gracie,
look at that.
He makes his professional debut here at Pride 10. And Ryan Gracie, the special Gracie, the crazy Gracie, the black sheep Gracie, making his pro debut, he defeats Tokimitsu Ishizawa by knockout, maybe technical knockout, but knockout at 2 minutes, 16 seconds of round 1. This is also the pro debut for Ishizawa. And this fight it starts exactly how you would expect from a Gracie and ends exactly how you would expect it from the crazy Gracie.
Yeah.
So Ryan comes out, he gets his takedown in Ishizawa's in the corner. Ryan's trying to improve his position, and when he goes to yank his opponent further away from the ropes, Ishizawa wraps his arm around it so Ryan can't. And at this point, all that did was piss Ryan off. So he's like, you know what? You want to do that? He bails on the grappling, stands up, and as Ishizawa stands up, he does his best impersonation of UFC version of Vitor Belfort and just lets his hands go. And Ishizawa blocks nothing. He seriously eats like 10 punches clean to the face. And the ropes are actually holding him up, so he can't even get knocked out and fall. So he's like suspended up against the ropes, just getting dinked in the face. Thankfully, the referee steps in, and Ryan Gracie wins his debut by freaking knockout. Like, go figure.
It's awesome. It's brutal. Yeah, it's a nasty finish there. Now, I think obvious question here is, wait a minute. So why exactly are 2 debuting dudes in the co-main event or the semi-main event here on Pride 10? And it's because Heian Gracie is a Gracie, and so Gracie's always get some special treatment. And Ishizawa was a professional wrestler known as Kendo Kashin, a decently popular pro wrestler. So, and he's, you know, making his debut here. Also a masked pro wrestler fighting without his mask. So this is kind of like a junior version of Henzo versus Sakuraba, you know, because it's you know, Japanese pro wrestler versus Gracie part 1, followed by Japanese pro wrestler versus Gracie part 2. So that's why this is here. And yeah, Ishizawa he's going to start a little trend that I have for this show, and that trend is called check out these dudes' records. So Ishizawa is in this fight, his pro debut, starts his career going 0-1, and would ultimately amass a very impressive record of 1 win, 5 losses, and 1 draw. And interestingly, that 1 win came against Heian Gracie, who got injured in the rematch, and Ishizawa pulled off the win. But yeah, 1-5-1 is the final record of this Kendo Kashin character.
Abysmal, definitely abysmal. But honestly,
not the worst we'll encounter tonight. Just you wait.
And that's really the theme of this: is guys who really didn't do so hot after this, or at least had a really hard end to their career, like just uncomfortably difficult. But what's even more sad than Ishizawa's record is the story of Heian Gracie. You know, unfortunately, you know, he went on and he won his last 4 fights, the last being in 2004 before his untimely passing in December of 2007. According to his wiki page, Wikipedia, it says that he passed away in a jail cell in Sao Paulo, Brazil, after being arrested for stealing and crashing a car and then attempting to hijack a motorcycle to flee. And I guess ultimately there was a psychiatrist came in, and he ended up getting accused of negligence for over-prescribing medication that they're saying actually caused the death of Heian Gracie. So tragic case, you know, just, and he was always the loose cannon Gracie, rumored to have a whole bunch of street fights. And I mean, it's just sad, you know, it's like you have someone who basically the world was their oyster, and they had prophecy to fulfill, so to speak. And he just went his own path and kind of did his own thing. So super sad, you know, kind of seeing how that all played out, because he was fun to watch fight. You know, he was so just gnarly out there and just not your standard typical Gracie. So, you know, RIP to Heian Gracie. Definitely a sad case, but I definitely enjoyed him while he was here. Yeah,
it's an unfortunate. It's an unfortunate end for him. So it's a shame. He did fight Sakuraba, lost to Sakuraba, but did have 1 fight there, and yeah, it's an unfortunate story for him, no doubt.
Speaking of unfortunate stories, not as unfortunate, but kind of still on the sadder end of things. Ken Shamrock. This is when we finally see the wheels starting to fall off.
Yeah.
This is Ken going from prime to not prime. Like that, like right before our very eyes. And I didn't like seeing it, and I didn't understand it at the time. I'm like, what's going on here? But looking back in the hindsight, and you go look at Ken's record from then on out, it's like, oh, I see.
And isn't that amazing to say this is when we start to see the wheels falling off 17 years ago? 17 years ago, 18 years ago is when we start to see the wheels falling off. And then, I guess he hasn't fought in I guess it's been about 1.5 years now since Hoist kicked him in the marbles and beat him. But
it was a knee to the marbles.
Yes, true. My bad. My bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ken Shamrock in this fight. Yeah, Ken Shamrock and Kazuyuki Fujita. A big fight. Shamrock's second one back from the WWE. He'd won his first, and the big return and stuff like that. And, Shamrock's got his moments. It's not all bad by any means, but eventually, he gets worn out. Vegeta's got him against the ropes, and it leads to a sort of classic meme-worthy moment where you can kind of see Shamrock doing a weird thing where he's talking to his cornerman, and he famously says, Petey Williams, Petey, my heart, throw in the towel. And Petey Williams has no choice but to throw in the towel, as Ken Shamrock seems to be indicating to Petey that he's, I don't know, he's about to have a heart attack or something like that. It's bad.
It's definitely bad. And because like round one starts and they come out and it's just like this clash of bulls right in the center of the ring. Neither man given an inch, neither man able to move the other. And it's the way they just came together. It was awesome. And then Ken starts letting his hands go. He starts tagging Fujita, throwing his combinations, landing his left hook. He was doing damn good. And then there was a moment where Fujita has Ken up in the corner. And by the way, I'm wearing the ponytail today in honor of Don Fry, who actually walked out with Fujita, and believe it or not, actually had a ponytail. Can you remember Don Fry with the ponytail? Because I don't. That's part of MMA history that I just blanked out and absolutely forgot. But yeah, so Don Fry's there talking shit to Ken Shamrock as he's in his corner. They're like right here. And to avoid a takedown, Shamrock grabs the rope. Referee comes in. Whoosh, yellow card. First yellow card of the 6-round retro that we're talking about, but it was sweet. It was like, oh man, that's what's up. Because there was a fight. It was the Ishihara Waleed Ismail fight where Takahashi got away with so many fence grabs. And it's like, if they only had the yellow cards, that wouldn't have been a thing. So, you know, it was cool seeing some sort of authority, you know, actually going on inside the fight. I thought that was cool.
It was cool. It was cool.
But yeah, I mean, ultimately it wasn't, I don't know if Ken Shamrock just petered out or, you know, maybe he was experiencing some sort of heart issues or whatever, but you know, this would become the quintessential Ken Shamrock fight moving forward. Like we just talked about, he fought Gracie recently. He got taken out from a low blow, and that became what Ken was known for. Like, aside from his knockout of Chemo, which was great, like let's not underscore that at all, but it was Chemo, you know. But you know, he's just known for the funk. Like his fights always end weird, and it's always like controversial, and there's always some bullshit going on, like with his Tito fights and stuff like that. So you know, it was just the beginning of the end, really. And
it's always weird. And the thing that always has struck me as really weird about the end of this fight, aside, I mean, it's just an odd ending in a lot of reasons, but one of the things that always strikes me as so strange is that he has a conversation with his corner, asking the corner to throw in the towel. He doesn't tap. The referee is right there. He could very easily just like tap or submit or tell the ref that he's done. But like Shamrock's a very, very proud guy, you know, who's got a real, you know, proud warrior streak. And I have to imagine that his insistence on having the corner throw in the towel was some, my only guess is that there is some sort of disconnect there for him that like, well, I didn't tap. My corner threw in the towel, even though I told them to throw in the towel, but like it feels different. I don't know. It's just weird because why say to the corner, throw in the towel? Why not just say to the referee, I'm done? The only
like legit logical reason I can think of is because he received a yellow card earlier in the fight. So he was already losing 10%, and he knew that he was about to get taken down and he didn't want that to happen. So he was actually holding onto the rope again.
Yeah.
And the referee was going to do another yellow card. So he was about to lose 20% of his purse, but he was like, hey, Petey, boom. So they stopped the fight right before he got that second yellow card. So maybe it was to save 10% of his purse.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I'll tell you one interesting thing about this fight. You know, we talked a lot about the ending, but to be fair, it was an exciting, you know, there's some excitement leading up to that. And in particular, this really feels like an event, this fight. You know, Shamrock, you know, again, he's only 2 fights out of pro wrestling here. He knows how to, you know, he knows how to make an entrance and make a mark and make it feel like a big fight. He's very good at that. Fujita is also a pro wrestler, our 3rd Japanese pro wrestler we're talking about. He comes out to the theme music of his sort of mentor, the great Antonio Inoki. He wears Antonio Inoki's towel. You know, he's got Inoki's fighting spirit coursing through his veins. And so, you know, it's a huge deal.
A little bit of Inoki's skull going on, too.
Yeah, a little bit of the Inoki skull. And, like, you know, in Japan, to get the privilege of coming out to Inoki's music, that is the real deal. Like you're not, you know, you've been like minted at that point to be allowed to wear his towel and come out to his music. And Fujita was hot stuff at this time. He had only one loss on his record here, and that one loss was kind of barely a loss. It was in the GP, and it was a forfeit like 2 seconds into the fight against Mark Coleman, where he came out injured. And honestly, he probably just should have thrown in the towel before the fight happened at all. So not much of a loss there. And, he seemed like he didn't ultimately materialize into being like a world champion level guy. But at this point, he seemed like, oh, this guy's the real deal.
Yeah, I mean, he had a win over Mark Kerr at this point, which is huge. Despite only being 4-1 overall, like a win over Mark Kerr, who had already won a couple UFC's tournaments, is a really big deal. So there was a lot of hype behind Fujita going in. And I mean, the fight was awesome. Like, this is fight of the night candidate, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, they really went at it. But this is also I feel like the last time I saw Ken Shamrock in a real fight.
That's a good point. Yeah, I agree.
So Ken's gone 4-11 since then. Oof. So that's tough right there. And Fujita actually went on to have some memorable fights. My favorite being his fight with Fedor Emelianenko.
Yeah.
Oh, that was so great. He hits Fedor so hard and puts him on skates, and Fedor's all got the rubber legs and stuff like that, and then summons these two haymakers and catches Fujita clean, and then club and subs him. Oh, that one's so good. We'll get to that on another day. But to carry on with check out their record and the sad endings. We talked about Ken Shamrock having a sad ending, and Fujita is actually he is on an 8-fight losing streak. With the most recent being this past December. So it looks like he's still fighting and seems to be traveling down the path of one Bob Sapp, unfortunately. I wish it weren't, because this fight was fucking great.
Yeah, it's fun stuff.
All right, so before that, a real interesting matchup. This one was definitely for the local crowd here. This was Masasaki Satake taking on Kazunari Murakami. Satake getting the TKO win 6 minutes and 58 seconds into the opening round. Came in 0-2, losing to Mark Coleman and Guy Metzger. Pro wrestling afro, like, the classic Japanese afro that everybody wore if you were a professional wrestler who didn't wear a mask. And Murakami was he was a pioneer, debuted in 95. His fight before we saw him Pride. Was it Pride 1?
First ever Pride fight. He is the first ever winner in Pride. The first
Big
man.
John Dixon.
Glorious. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, history.
So this was actually entertaining and fun, and not because either guy was a great fighter. It just seemed really competitive. Like, they were both green in the same kind of way. Like, the stand-up was just abysmal. Yeah. Like, neither man knew really how to throw a technical punch or had any sort of boxing experience, it seemed, but they were still willing to throw. And the grappling was, it was fun. It was kind of back and forth. You had, Murakami with the early takedown to full mounts, and then you had Murakami, he escaped, and then when Satake went to go throw him again, Murakami, like, managed to keep his hips under him and found top position, and then just pounded Satake, or pounded out I got those backwards.
We got you. Yes.
Satake pounded out Murakami after getting the full mount. Yeah. So I thought this was a fun fight, sloppy as can be, but it just, I don't know. It felt like a real professional wrestling match.
It does. And I'll tell about that a bit. I'll tell you quickly, my favorite moment in it that sort of shows the kind of technical level of what's going on here. So there's a point where Murakami is in mount and he's sort of, coming down, and to get out of it, Satake just pushes his arm straight up, up against this, which is a disaster. Like, clearly,
armbar central.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting armbarred every time, except Murakami doesn't seem to really know the armbar, so he doesn't do it. But it is kind of amazing to be like, no, terrible escape. Oh, that's fine, because your opponent doesn't know what isn't good at jiu-jitsu either, so it's all good. But yeah, it's very much a pro wrestling style fight. You got to really be up on your Japanese combat sports history for this one. So Masaki Satake is a K1 legend in Japan. Fought for K1 for many a year, and he was there he was the one the Japanese, contingent who would always, be their great hope to win the big K1 GP. He never did, but that he was the guy that they always banked their hopes on. And Murakami is this judo guy. And, it does have that pro wrestling feel. And in particular, the real pro wrestling feel here is that this is actually not really the fight that, like, the fight that we're really talking about here, like that they booked this for, is not actually Satake versus Murakami. It's actually Satake versus Ogawa, who is in Murakami's corner and gets in Satake's face afterwards. So this is your classic pro wrestling booking of, like, I'm going to fight, the slightly lesser buddy of the guy who I'm actually going to fight at WrestleMania. And eventually then, yes, indeed, Ogawa and Satake would indeed fight, and Ogawa would go on to win that one.
Yeah, it's so Satake, this was actually his only professional mixed martial arts win.
Indeed it was. You're going to ask, what's the record of this guy? And it's on my sheet. Satake's final record, 1-8-1. This is it. This is the lone win for Masaki Satake. Rough. Yeah,
he did draw even with Sam Greco in 2001. But sure, to be fair, those losses were Ogawa, Igor, Semi Schilt, Rampage Jackson, and Yoshida. So It's not like there's any shame in losing to those guys. It just sucks when you have 10 professional fights and those guys are amongst your opposition. That's tough money. I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. Murakami, on the other hand, he failed to learn from Takahashi at UFC 12 and was TKO'd in his next fight against Valid Ismail. So, unfortunate there, but he did win his last fight with an armbar in Jungle Fight 1 back in 2003 in Brazil.
There you go.
So that's interesting to see him at the first Jungle Fight, which is one of the largest regional promotions in Brazil.
I love that Murakami is like this total, like, sort of footnote guy, and yet we have now talked about him 2 times on the 6 Round Retro.
Well, hey, if we ever do Jungle Fights 1, he'll be up there.
You need to do the complete Murakami, all 10 shows that he ever appeared on.
Oh, man. All right, so moving on to an absolute shit-kicking. Igor Vovchanchyn defeated Enson Inoue by TKO doctor stoppage at 10 minutes of round 1, meaning once the bell rang, it was over.
Ooh.
Inoue was just completely done. Igor, he was 8-1 in Pride at the time, and 40-3 overall, which is crazy, having fought in Russia, Ukraine, Brazil, like all over. Had a recent loss to Mark Coleman in the GP 2000 finals. And one of my all-time favorites. This dude was an ice-cold killer. Out of his 55 wins, he finished 46 of them, which is an 83% finishing rate, which is absolutely unheard of for someone with over 65 professional fights. Like, this is a kickboxing record here. You know what I mean? Like, I love this dude. He's definitely one of my all-time favorites because, like, he was just a savage, and he's known for hurting people. Like, he has so many wins on his record due to injury, TKO, or doctor or corner stoppages. Like, look at his resume and see the way he wins. Like, a broken nose, broken arm, 6 submissions by strikes, submission by leg kick, TKO by leg kick, submission by exhaustion, submission by headbutts, TKO by forfeit. Like, I don't think I've seen anyone's record that is just so odd and just full of just so many weird kind of finishes. Like, this dude was just hurting people left and right. And
basically every one of his finishes should just say, like, beat him down. Just beat him down until he couldn't do anything. Vovchanchyn's awesome. He's a dude that just has, like, ham hocks for fists and would just take people out, usually standing. In this one, he does make it he does apply a sort of Khabib Nurmagomedov style, take him down and just beat the snot out of him on the mat instead of on standing up, because this is mostly on the ground. But it's super entertaining for those 10 minutes because he is just putting such a walloping on him over those 10 minutes. And it's interesting. There's always a little bit of tension because Inoue is a very good submission fighter. He was only a couple fights removed from having submitted Randy Couture at this point. So, he's a very dangerous fighter off his back, but he tries. He makes a couple of decent, attempts to try to get something going, but he can never overcome the power. And yeah, he just gets beat up.
Yeah, and it's crazy too because at least for me, I'm sure everyone else, they expected, an instant takedown from Ensign here, But Ensign comes out and throws a heavy right hand and then just starts brawling with Igor and actually was getting the better of him. Like he split Igor like under his eye, like Igor's bleeding all over the place. And then to keep on with the unexpectedness, Igor throws Ensign to the ground and follows him there. And he's just like is content to hang out in full guard and get his Mark Coleman on. Like, yeah, man, that I couldn't believe he was doing that because Igor's a kickboxer. Like he's coming out kicking people in the head and stuff. But he was like, let me ground and pound this guy.
Yeah.
And it was so bad. Like the barrage of ground strikes were so clean and so vicious. Like it looked like Mario Yamasaki was reffing this one. You know what I mean? This was shades of Valentina Shevchenko and Priscilla Cachoeira from UFC Bellum the other weekend. That's how bad of a beating this was. It was so bad that Ensign couldn't even walk to his corner after the opening round. Like he had to get dragged to his corner and couldn't even sit on the stool. Like he had to just lay in his corner, just like in agony. And thankfully they called the fight off because he took way more punishment than he should have in this one.
But I do love how in true MMA fashion, it does take him a little bit to call the fight off. He doesn't move when the round ends. He's just like in a puddle. And like his brother picks him up and like drags him back to the corner where he's, like you said, he's just out. But there is still this debate of like, well, I don't know, maybe he can continue. What do you guys? The doctor's looking at him, they're chatting. Finally, someone is smart enough to be like, no, there's no discussion to be had here. Like he's clearly done, and he is.
Yeah,
so a very very impressive win.
Awesome performance for Igor here, and Igor continued to be a staple action fighter for Pride.
Yeah.
According to Sherdog, he retired 55-10-1 in 2005 with the Pride record of 18-8-1, which is highly respectable. And yeah, he just has that kickboxing record in MMA that I love. And
great.
So,
great one.
Such a violent man and a tough out for anyone.
Yep.
Mario Sperry, Crow Cop, and Alistair Overeem are the only three guys I can think of that just ran through Igor. Everyone else, nah. You had to bring your lunch because it was going to be a long day. So go back and revisit the career of Igor. You will not be disappointed. Pure killer. Ensign, on the other hand, he continued on with his losing streak. To make matters worse, he fought Heath Herring and Big Nog, tough outs. But he did win his last fight with an armbar in 2010. So at least he went out on a high note, unlike most of this card who had abysmal endings to their career.
Sure.
So that was cool. Speaking of abysmal endings, Mark Kerr defeated Igor Borisov by submission. Neck crank, but we know that was a can opener at 2 minutes and 6 seconds of round one. Kerr, he was 12-1 at the time, just suffered his first loss to Fujita in the Pride Grand Prix. So he comes in, he's 5-1-1 in Pride. He won UFC 14 and 15 tournaments, fighting this 1-0 guy who had a fight on the Japanese regional circuit, and even like going up as Borisov is walking up to the ring, Eddie Bravo is like, I think Borisov is in deep trouble here. And I'm just like, way to be honest, Eddie Bravo. And he turned out to be absolutely correct because, this is just completely one-sided. Kerr comes out spamming leg kicks of all things, like heavy-ass leg kicks, and gets his double leg takedown, and then he locks up a can opener and actually gets the frickin' tap. Like, who submits to a can opener?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, it's good stuff. Kerr has a lot of these fights back in his early days. Like all 4 of his UFC fights are like this, where he's just so much stronger and just so much better and just so much better. He did have a pretty decent striking game, and his shot is just. It's fast, it's powerful, it's amazing. And then once he gets on top of you, like he's just so strong. So this is a sort of typical Kerr overmatched opponent win here. And this is still at a time when Kerr did seem like he was absolutely phenomenal. Though you're right, it's coming off the Fujita loss, and that was you were starting to see like. maybe all was not well in Kerrland here, and we knew we would eventually come to find out. If you've ever seen the documentary about Mark Kerr, the Smashing Machine, it's sad, but it is absolutely essential viewing for any MMA fan. So in that, we would come to find out that by this point in his career, yes, things were not good in Kerrland. And you can't really see that so much here, but in this is the era where you can start to see that.
Yeah, and I laugh at the can opener because it's funny to me that, seeing someone get caught in that. But to be fair, Kerr probably had the most painful can opener of anybody at that time.
Yeah.
Like, period. Mark Coleman may be a close second, but Kerr is just looking like Lou Ferrigno out there at this point. You know what I mean? Like, he's a complete hoss.
Yeah.
And what was weird, Borisov actually got carried out on a stretcher for some reason. Like, I wasn't sure why. That was weird. Maybe
he's his neck. I don't know. Yeah, and they seemed to collar him. It seemed like he had some neck. I mean, again, when you're Mark Kerr and you grab somebody and just like pull their head, like it's bad. It's gonna hurt. And Borisov never fought again. He clearly was like, nope, that's not going to be doing that.
Yeah, smart for Borisov.
Yes.
But Mark Kerr, this was his last major win on the big stage. He went 2-10 after this, which is extremely sad. So go check out the Smashing Machine documentary. It's it'll give you a little more insight to maybe why his career wasn't as long as maybe a lot of people thought it would have been.
Yeah.
But man, yeah, just another guy that just went out in ways you don't like to see. And I wonder what he's doing nowadays. I haven't heard anything about him lately.
I don't know. But you're right. I mean, when he was at his peak, he looked like this guy is clearly going to be the best that we've ever seen. And he had a lot of personal problems that just got in the way of that ever happening.
Speaking of problems, Gilbert Yvel defeats your boy Gary Big Daddy Goodrich by KO head kick, 28 seconds of round 1. Gilbert, this is his sophomore Pride appearance. He lost his debut to Pride Vitor, which is the grapple heavy Vitor. He lost to Hendo earlier in the year. Goodrich, 3-6 in Pride at the time, faced some pretty stiff competitions before this. And they come out and, they're moving, there's feinting going on. And Yvel throws one head kick, catches Gary right by the ear. Gary's out cold. The fight's over in 28 seconds. Not a single punch was thrown here.
Yeah, the CompuStrike numbers for this one's are pretty good. Gary Goodrich, 0 punches thrown, 0 kicks thrown. Gilbert Yvel, 0 punches thrown, 1 kick thrown, 1 kick landed. That's the fight. That's it. Just a absolutely picture perfect head kick. Which, that's what you get with Yvel. Yvel's he's a very good, very vicious stand-up fighter. And this is sort of what everybody kind of wanted to see out of Gilbert Yvel when he came to Pride. And we got it here. The problem with Yvel was always that he didn't have he had no ground game, no takedown defense. So if he's fighting somebody who's going to stand there and trade with him, Yvel's going to shine and it's going to be awesome. And you're going to get something like this. If you decide that you don't want to just have your head kicked off and you're going to try to take him down, then you're probably going to win.
Yeah, you're probably going to win, but not without going through a bunch of bullshit. So
yeah.
Yvel, I would say, went on to become known as the dirtiest fighter in combat sports. If you're asking me personally, I would not put anyone ahead of him as far as being a dirty fighter. This dude has multiple DQ losses on his record for various offenses.
3 DQ losses. Who has 3 DQ losses? That dude, whichever fight it was this past weekend, with Li Jingling, where he just gouged a guy's eye and he had no warning or anything. You have to shoot someone in the face to get DQ'd in MMA. And Yvel has been DQ'd 3 times.
Yeah. UFC 221, Li Jingliang was trying to escape a guillotine choke from Jake Matthews, and he panicked and just started gouging the eyes. And that pales in comparison to what Yvel did to Don Fry during their fight. I mean, it was so bad. And not only that, I mean, there's footage of Yvel knocking out referees.
Oh yeah.
In the fight. You know what I mean? He just, remember we were talking about the Affliction shows. He was banned from fighting in Vegas. He couldn't even get on the Affliction cards because he wasn't allowed to compete in the US of A. Like that's how much of a bad reputation Gilbert Ivell has, and it's merited. You know, like you can't deny it. I can't. Who is more dirty than Gilbert Ivell?
It's hard to say. Gilbert Ivell, number one.
Yeah, has to be.
Yeah.
Which is weird though. He's actually on a 3-fight winning streak. His last fight was he knocked out Rico Rodriguez back in November of 2016. So I'm not sure if he's retired or just severely inactive right now, but he's still kicking, I guess.
Seems like a guy who'll kind of stick around for a little bit. He seems like a guy who like Rizin would pair up against Crow Cop. That seems like a really logical Rizin fight, doesn't it?
Wow, it really does. I like that. Like,
they can do that.
And the fact that Crow Cop's still going is another conversation for another time. But Gary Goodrich, this marked 3 straight losses, losing 5 of his last 6. But crazily, he actually goes on a nice 13-3-1 run after this, which is pretty respectable, you know. Of course, that run ended with a sad 7-fight losing skid, finishing up in December of 2010. But he did have that nice, you know, 17-fight stretch where he was doing his damn thing. So if you're a Big Daddy fan, go check that run out and stay away from his last 7 fights.
And you know I am. Always love watching Big Daddy. Not this fight, but
no, definitely not this fight. Hard to watch, but he was, you know, Goodrich is the unsung hero of mixed martial arts.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so yeah, Ivell, his last fight was Rico Rodriguez. Before this, we saw Rico Rodriguez 6-1 pre-UFC Rico Suave here. This was 3 fights before he actually went on his run that led him to the UFC title. He had 1 pride win over Big Daddy Goodrich, like we just said. And the guy he's taking on here, Giant Ochai, 0-1 coming in, lost his debut on the regional circuit. He was big, and he had an amazing afro, which I liked. And he had an afro on his back also. Like, let's be real here. Like, this was a hairy dude. He was a giant hairy guy.
And he was 0-1. His 1 loss, Igor Borisov, Mark Kerr's opponent. That's the guy Borisov beat. This is Giant Ochai. So there you go.
It's like 6 degrees of Pride FC here.
Of low level Pride dudes.
Yeah. So he was basically the sacrificial lamb for Rico Rodriguez, who had a lot of hype behind him. He was this big American wrestler, pretty athletic. And I mean, this was basically Rico Rodriguez all day long here. Giant Ochai tries to grab for a guillotine and just gets body slammed. And he did escape a knee bar, which I thought was actually kind of impressive and a little bit surprising. And the crowd went crazy when Ochai actually escaped. But, you know, Rico, he took the full mount, went to back, gets back to full mount, and does a smother choke. Like he's literally uses his center mass to obstruct the mouth and nose of Giant Ochai. And Ochai taps out. So it's like, you know, it's one of those submissions, much like the can opener, where you're just like, really? Like, that's what took you out? Like, really?
Yeah, Ochai, you know, yeah, I mean, he does what he did. Rico does what he does here. Ochai is, you know, right. He's just one of those sort of Pride sacrificial lambs. He's a pro wrestler too. He's in there. He's got the sunglasses. He's got the afro. He's got the hair. He's just kind of a silly guy. And Pride had a lot of these silly guys. He's one of them. I think the two things, one interesting, one sad about his career. One, he did not have a tremendous record, but he went 3-3-2. It's not terrible on this Pride 10 sliding scale, but he does have a loss to UFC 1's Zane Frazier, which is kind of amazing. Zane at the time was a whopping 1-8, and he beat Giant Ochai. And much like Renzo Gracie, Ochai came to a sad ending. He died actually from an accident when he was training in a pro wrestling training camp dojo, I guess it would be in Japan. And just in the training, there was something went awry, and he died as a result. So an unfortunate end for poor Giant Ochai there.
Definitely unfortunate. And something that Giant Ochai did have was an abundance of personality.
Oh yeah.
You know, I couldn't understand what he was saying, but the crowd seemed to love it, and he was down to rock the microphone, and he managed to find 3 wins before it was all said and done. So that's awesome there.
Yeah, he's one of those just pride fun guys. Like that was what I talked about in the beginning. Like these shows are not always like, again, your classic like good fight, but he was fun and he made this fight fun. And even though Rico really kind of dominated, and even though we're kind of joking around about it, like it was actually entertaining because Ochai, just sort of on the strength of Ochai's personality, like fighting to like make it entertaining, and the fans being, anytime he accomplished anything in the fight, the fans went nuts because he's not expected to do anything. So if he can get anything off on Rico, it's a big deal. So it's exciting.
Yeah, it definitely made it fun. I enjoyed it. So Rico goes on. He has another pride fight, wins King of the Cage match against Paul Montello, and then he goes and knocks out Andrei Arlovsky, starting his historic UFC run, ultimately winning the heavyweight title. However, he was finished in his last 4 bouts. As we said, Gilbert Yvel knocked him out recently in 2016, so it's sad he's on a down skid. And there was before that, there was a dark period, I remember, with Rico Rodriguez where he just really let himself go, and he got really big, and not in a good way. And but he got rededicated, refocused himself, got back to training, dropped the weight, got back into fighting. But he's older now, so he dropped his last 4.
Yeah, he just lost his dedication for the sport, and like you said, put on a tremendous amount of weight. I remember he was on, I don't remember what it was. He was on one of those like celebrity reality shows, like Celebrity Fit Club or Celebrity Rehab or something like that. I can't remember. And,
maybe The Biggest Loser. Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe something along those lines. And it was just a point of like, oh, Rico, geez, dude. There's a certain Mark Kerr aspect to Rico where it felt like he maybe was going to be this all-time great, and he did ultimately. He's in the record books as a UFC champion, but also falls into that same kind of Kerr category of like, if everything had gone well, it would be interesting to see what could have come from him.
Yeah, the outside of the cage things that were going on seemed to have a large effect on the performances inside. Much like Kerr, that's a nice comparison there.
Yeah, similar.
All right, so before that, we had an absolute banger of a fight. Another candidate for fight of the night, in my opinion. Wanderlei Silva defeats Guy Metzger by knockout at 3 minutes and 45 seconds of the first round. Guy comes in 1-2 in Pride already. Wanderlei returning to Pride after leaving 3-0 to fight Tito Ortiz in the UFC, and then he had a fight in Brazil. He comes back, and this was fun, man. I love this fight. Guy comes out taking no shit, and he starts landing on Wanderlei. Like he is letting his kicks go, his hands go. Actually cut Wanderlei over his eye, and then Wanderlei smiles. And then once Wanderlei smiles, it's like he flips the switch and then just goes into full savage mode. And then drops Metzger with a heavy right hand and just gets aggressive, like hyper aggressive, and starts throwing his flurry like classic Wanderlei Silva. It's so intense that during a flurry, he throws a headbutt, a standing headbutt, like kaboom. Headbutts are illegal at this point. You're not allowed to do that, but the ref didn't call it. No one called it. Steven Quattro's called it, but that was about it. So he lands this mean headbutt and then lands a heavy right hook, and Metzger gets slumped in the corner. Classic Wanderlei Silva. When you think of the axe murderer, this is who you're thinking about here. Yeah. This felt like a street fight.
Yeah, this is a great fight. This is my one, definitely right up there for fight of the night for me. It's just a great. You're right. It's just a classic Wanderlei performance, and Metzger gives as good as he takes here. He's game for it. He fights and he's in it. But ultimately, he just gets mowed over and overwhelmed, as you tend to do. And you're right. He's got that great headbutt. He just plows him over and
so
turns
gangster.
the volume. And it's great. It's a really good performance. It's also, interestingly, it's the start of the Wanderlei run. Like this, this would lead. This is the beginning of the undefeated streak that would ultimately get him the middleweight championship and the wins over all those Sakuraba and Rampage and all those dudes. This is it.
Rampage twice.
Yeah.
So 18-fight unbeaten streak started, finally losing to Mark Hunt at Pride Shockwave 2004. we know the classic Mark Hunt atomic butt drop. Everyone loves that. I'm sure we'll get there at some point. Currently, Wanderlei's in Bellator. If we want to go back to the sad endings to careers, he just didn't know when to call it quits. He could have retired on that epic war that was Brian Stan, but he just couldn't stay away. And now he's a Bellator cast member and you know, doing that whole sadness. And for Guy Metzger, for me, Guy was my first experience with an MMA gatekeeper. Like, he was the bar. So if you beat him, you were pretty good. But if you lost, well, then you probably were not going to be a world beater. So he was like the first bar that I actually realized was kind of that middle tier in mixed martial arts.
That's a good call. I hadn't really thought of him like that, but I think that's very accurate. Yeah, that's a good call. He was, you know, he was an early guy that just sort of had the whole game. Like, he kind of understood all of it. He sort of had that Tim Kennedy style of being like, I get it all. I don't have one particular area that I'm great at, but I'm good enough at everything that if you are not good, like, he'll take advantage of it. Yeah,
I mean, Metzger had the skills everywhere. He was in reasonable shape. You know, he wasn't like a hulking figure, but he was definitely, you know, he was no slouch. That's for sure.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing. And he felt like a more complete, you know, he felt like a more complete mixed martial arts fighter earlier than most guys felt like complete MMA fighters. You know, like, he felt like he had more dimensions to his game at an early stage than a lot of guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go ahead and say this was fight of the night. It has to be fight of the night.
It's pretty awesome. It's a good one.
Oh, man, I will never forget that headbutt. Like, that was so sweet. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a headbutt thrown in a combination like that. Like, an intentional headbutt. It was so sweet. Like,
that's part of it. Mix it in.
Okay, so opening up the card, we had Pride Vitor Belfort defeating Daijiro Matsui by unanimous decision. This went the full 20 minutes. Belfort 1-1 in Pride at this point in time. He you know, he dropped a fight to Sakuraba. He won a decision over Gilbert Ivel. This is, and when I say Pride Vitor, it's the grapple heavy. This isn't the I'm gonna punch you a million times in the first 10 seconds. This is, I'm gonna come out and I'm gonna put on my jiu-jitsu hat and my wrestler hat and I'm gonna get my Mark Coleman on. And I'm not gonna blast you with any barrage of punches, and we're gonna take this to the ground. And you know, Matsui, he was 1-4-2 coming in. Only win happened because of a disqualification. So this dude was a complete jobber to the stars here. You know, he lost to Carlos Newton, Wanderlei, and Igor, you know, coming into this. So this was supposed to be a gimme for Belfort, right? But Belfort just couldn't seal the deal. You know, he just couldn't get it done.
Yeah, I find this to be a really fascinating period in Belfort's career, because he has a series of these fights. So the Ivel fight is before this, which is very similar to this. And then there's this one. And then he fights Bobby Southworth and actually does get a submission over him. And then he fights Heath Herring, and the Herring fight looks very similar to this as well. He's got a very clear thing he's doing here, which is just like, I'm going to take these guys down. I'm not going to strike. And I'm going to not even really jiu-jitsu him, more like wrestle him. It's much more like American style wrestling as opposed to like Brazilian style jiu-jitsu. You know, he's training with Brazilian top team at the time, and he reminds me a lot in here of like some of Ricardo Arono's performances. I think he had a similar thing that he did from time to time. Again, I find it really, there's a part of this that I find really interesting at this phase of his career, because like, maybe it's like, so I'm also a big boxing fan. I watch a lot of boxing, and in boxing, you know, when guys are coming up or when guys have losses or things like that, they will oftentimes book them in fights for a very deliberate reason. Like, I want to get this guy in here with a series of tough dudes who are going to like give him some rounds, or I want to get this guy in here with some guys who are going to, you know, a couple like sort of brawler types so that he can learn how to deal with a brawler. And I feel like these Pride fights are a very deliberate, like, training choice for Vitor to be like, I am not going to just explode with my hands, as he probably could do against Matsui. I'm going to like really work my wrestling. So it's interesting when you sort of look at the whole career of Vitor. This is, from a sort of tactical side, a really interesting time. That said, it's also a really, really boring time. These are boring fights. Like, this is not.
Someone had to say it. Someone had to say it.
It's boring. Like, he's not. he does beat up Matsui decently, but it's not interesting.
No, it's pretty lackluster, and I'm the biggest. You will not find a bigger Vitor Belfort fan than I, but this is one you should definitely skip, or at least watch it in fast forward mode. You know what I mean? That's like the only way to really watch this fight if you're going to. But really, I mean, that was about it. Matsui, he's another one of those guys who had a really
last one on my list. Ready? Final record: 12-28-6. 12-28-6. That is insane
for Matsui. I'm getting 14-30-7.
14-30-7. Yeah, tomato. We're in the ballpark. Yeah.
Why does he have so many different?
He's a pro wrestler. He's probably there's discrepancies about what was a work and what was a shoot. That would probably be my guess. There's some diciness about that.
Yeah, a lot of weird fights, but I mean, he had quite a few Pride bouts. I remember him all over the place. I don't ever recall him winning that I can think of.
No, but he's got some fun ones. I mean, he's got a lot of very entertaining fights for sure, but not a lot that he wins. I think the only one of his wins that I think I've ever seen is the DQ one.
That's fair enough. Yeah, tough ending to his career. He went out with a couple. I guess he only went out with a 2-fight losing skid. Not that bad.
Yeah, it's not a tough ending. It's a tough career. It's not that he ended poorly. It's that it never got going at all.
Yeah, like I'm on Tapology and I'm looking at some of his bouts. It says like custom rules bout. What the hell is that?
Yeah, see, stuff like that. I'm like, what was his like? Oh yeah, like how setting aside the DQ, what's his record get to before he actually wins? He loses. He's at 1-6-2 before a legitimate non-DQ win.
Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah.
That's rough.
It was a King of the Cage in 2001.
Ugh.
He did beat Pele though, which was a big win.
Oh yeah, I have seen that. All right. I've seen that.
That's like his one. Or no shit. Then he goes on to have a disqualification win over Rampage at Pride 18.
He's the anti-Ival. He has 2 DQ wins. I would have favored him easily if he had fought Ival. No doubt would have scored a DQ win with ease against Ival.
The odds would have been like -500 for Matsui by DQ.
Exactly.
All right, well, those are the fights. Let's recap this. So we got Pride Vitor grappling it up, being as boring as ever. We have vintage Wanderlei Silva looking as fresh and as savage as ever, throwing headbutts in the middle of combinations. Pre-UFC Rico Rodriguez in top shape. The final meaningful fight of Mark Kerr's career. We got the Mark Coleman version of Igor Vovchanchyn, which is unique and rare. And we saw the beginning of the end for Ken Shamrock. We saw the wheels start to fall off. Pro debut for the late Zane Gracie. And prime Sakuraba hunted another Gracie here, breaking the arm of Renzo, one of the most iconic subs of all time, in my opinion. And we saw some guys on the come up. Rico, Wandy, even high-end Fujita. These guys are on the way up. Shamrock, Kerr, those guys were on the way out. And then, as you mentioned, a whole bunch of athletes who finished their career just on a tragic note with horrible losing skids and terrible records. But what was your big takeaway from Pride 10?
I mean, my big takeaway, I think, is that it's a good example of what happens when you put together a really interesting top to bottom show. I would like to try to say at the end of these, what are the fights that you should watch? And like, if you were to watch anything from this, it should be Wanderlei and Metzger. Like, go watch that. But really what you should do is watch the whole show, because it's a spectacle and it's an exciting show. It's not the kind of thing that like, oh, I'm going to watch one fight tonight and one fight tomorrow, or that's not going to be very interesting. But when you put them all together, it's so much greater than the sum of its parts. So my recommendation for you guys out there who've never seen it, watch the whole thing. You can fast forward through Vitor and Matsui, but other than that, give the whole thing a go, because it's a blast and it's a really good time, and it really, I think, captures that Pride specialness really well.
Well said. So you can find this on Fight Pass, of course. It's 180 minutes long. If you skip Vitor's fight or fast forward it, deduct 20 minutes from that, 160 minutes. You know, that's you can knock it out between naps while you're sick. That's my that's how I like to keep it. Well, shit, man, that is our show. Frazier, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for tuning in. Next week, we're gonna have another Frazier's pick. Frazier,
I'm excited for this one. All right, we're venturing a little bit outside the realm of normal stuff here. We're doing something a little bit different and a little bit weird. We're going to 2002. And in 2002, we are going to dip our toes outside of the MMA circle and get into the K1 World Grand Prix Finals. Something a little different and a little bit funky. So K1 World Grand Prix Finals 2002. It's going to be exciting times.
Well, let me go ahead and just look this up really fast so I know what I'm getting into here.
It's on Fight Pass. Promise you.
Is this the finals?
The K1 World Grand Prix 2002 Finals.
Sweet. Let's see who we got on here. Oh,
you've got some Hunt.
Who's in the banner? Cepho, who's Hunt LeBanner?
All sorts of dudes. You got some Jerome LeBanner, some Ray Cepho, some Ernesto Hoos, some Peter Arts.
Oh man. And you know what? We're gonna have a lot of. This might be another one where it's like, oh, they end in sadness for a couple of these guys here, but man, what an excellent choice, Frazier Coffeen. I'm excited. So yeah, if you guys want, go ahead and start watching that. We'll be back next Monday to recap and go over all the action. Also, tell us what you think of the show. Give us a like if you would like. That's the thumbs up down below. In the comments section, tell us about your favorite early MMA moment, whether it be Pride, UFC, K1. We would love to hear. Keep the conversation going. Twitter. You can follow Frazier at FCoffeen. You can follow me at The Eddie Mercado. You can read us both over at bloodyelbow.com. Subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube. That's DOTCOM. You get all our shows, all our vivisections and 6 rounds and If I Did It and Care Don't Care, the whole shebang. Whitelist us on your ad blockers. That also helps us out a bunch. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Go be a good person.